Hey, what's up guys, Nils here and welcome back to another video. So since this week is a very chill week and there is not much going on and we're all waiting for the update, I decided to sit down and make an updated tier list. Considering the last time I actually made a tier list was such a long time ago that we actually didn't even have Monster and Time Lord in the game. So you realize that it's been a couple of months ever since I made it last time. But anyway, it's been something that's been heavily requested, and since we had some time, I actually sat down and decided to do it. So here's the list, and I'm gonna go ahead and talk a little bit about every single passive real quick. Now, keep in mind, guys, that this approach is more from a limitless side of you. Like some of these passives, which I will talk about in a little bit, they have a little bit less value when they are just by themselves, so you have to approach these from a limitless side, like double passives. And I'm gonna also talk a little bit about later in the video about good combinations for limitless units, because a lot of people ask about that, like what synergizes well with each other and what doesn't. But anyway, let's go in the list and let's break down the passives, any changes that have happened since the last time, and we'll pick it off there. So starting off here with the S plus list. Now, arguably the best passive in the game, which would be Monster. Now, I thought Monster was slightly nerfed, but apparently in the AFS Discord, it's still 3 times damage, even though people have been telling me that it's been nerfed to like 2.8 or something. Anyway, no signs of such information on AFS Discord, so we're gonna continue with this knowledge that we have 3 times damage, 1.5 times attack speed, and 1.5 times size. Monster is absolutely a monstrous passive, and if you have it on a good unit, you are very lucky. I've yet to see one of them, so I'm a little bit salty about that. And its chance of hatching it is 0.027%, just like every secret passive. Next up, we have God. Now, God is still an insane passive. People think it's not that good because they compare it with Monster, but it's still one hell of a passive. 2.25 times damage, so no other passive in the game besides Monster comes even close to it in terms of damage multiplier. Has a 50% built-in attack speed and -2 hits for ultimate, which is not that big of a deal. Besides that, you get some increased movement speed and a very small size increase, but honestly, the reason why it doesn't compare with Monster and why Monster is such a much better passive is because those -2 hits for ultimate attack do not really translate that close to such a damage loss compared to Monster. That's why it's not that good. But still, it is a great passive. If you get it, you are extremely lucky and it's gonna go a long way for you. Next up, we have a mythical passive in the S plus list, Ace. I have been talking about this passive for such a long time, and people were really mocking me at first for saying that Ace is OP, but lately people have started realizing how good Ace is, and especially ever since its damage component got buffed. It used to be 1.25 a while ago, now it's 1.4 damage increase, and the best factor about it is that it gives you 100% critical strike chance. So all of your attacks and all of your ultimate ticks are guaranteed to crit, which is what makes it amazing. And it is one hell of a passive. It is the rarest mythical passive in the game and the second rarest behind the secret passives. So if you have managed to acquire one of those, you are a very lucky man, and it is one hell of a passive. Next up, to wrap up this S plus tier list, we have Time Lord. Now, Time Lord has a lot more uses than its utility use, which is the 0.25 time effect, and unlike a lot of people think. So Time Lord especially recently got buffed on its damage, so you have that 1.25 damage multiplier from Time Lord, and it gives you 3 times more attack speed, which is the crazy part, honestly. Like, your unit just attacks so fast, and just to balance out this effect, your unit does take 5 more hits to cast out its ultimate ability, but it's still a great passive. It's very good for damage, but it's something that you wanna combine with something like Ace or a pure damage passive like Blessing, Tactical, Monster, something like that, maybe even God. Like Time Lord with Ghostly would be a bad combination together because you would be overloaded on attack speed and your unit would get ultimate locked. But if you compare it with a raw damage passive, it's a great damage passive, so definitely don't sleep on it. If you roll it on a good unit, do not reroll it. Next up, we're moving to the S category. Obviously, first of all, Ghostly. Ghostly has a 50% damage multiplier by itself and a 50% attack skill multiplier, which is honestly what makes it a great passive. Like, it gives you sort of the best of both worlds, and with a 1.5 damage multiplier that's been around for a couple of updates now. It used to be very weak when it was first introduced, but with that damage that it has now, it's a very competitive passive and the second best passive in the game, I would say, behind Ace, obviously excluding secret passives because they're just way too rare to consider into the equation. Now, next up, I have Tactical 3. Now, Tactical 3 has very mixed feelings. A lot of people like it, a lot of people don't. But trust me guys, Tac 3 is one hell of a passive. It is definitely an S tier passive. It just rolled damage increase 2 times, like 100% damage increase. It is amazing. And its only downside is that it's actually only vs bosses, as you can see here in the tooltip. So the only downside is actually happening when you play solo, and when you have a lot of them, you are very weak. But if you play with a group of people and you can reliably sit on the boss and you get full value out of it, it is an insane passive. Now, I wouldn't advise you to get more than 2, maybe 3 of them. After that, I would say it's really bad because you're gonna fall behind by losing a lot of damage on the sides, especially if you are a solo player and you're farming solo. That's where it can hurt you, but besides that, it's one hell of a passive. And its chance is 0.94%, so it's not that rare. You will come across it quite often, I would say, especially if you are a player that has a lot of shards and rerolls. So it is a great passive. Now, moving on to Blessing. Blessing, normally I was gonna put it on A category, on the top of A category, but I kinda wanted to break down from the tank and giants of the world, etc. So I put it on the last, on the S tier. It is a good passive. It's also fairly easy to get for a mythical at 0.4% chance. It's a very high percent for a mythical passive actually, and it's the easiest mythical passive in the game to acquire. Now, Blessing gives 75% damage increase and a couple of movement speed, 2.5 times here movement speed increase, so definitely a great passive, but I would put it a step below the other 2 passives on the S tier. Just saying that out. Still a very good passive. If you get it, keep it obviously. Rerolling Blessing would be a no-no for most players. Very few players have the luxury of rerolling of Blessing, but yeah, S tier, I would say bottom S tier, but the gap from Blessing with other passives is quite a lot. Now, moving on to the A tier, we have Giant and Tank. 2 very similar passives. They both give 65% damage increase. Now, Giant is slightly better. As you can see here, there is a variation in the movement speed. So Giant has a 20% movement speed slow, whilst Tank has a 50%. So Tank is a little bit slow. Also, Giant looks a little bit cooler because it has that 50% size modifier, and it is a little bit rarer than Tank for that reason. 1.6%, while Tank is at 2%, but they're both almost equal damage-wise. Maybe Giant, because of the movement speed difference, might get 1 auto attack off before Tank gets there, but besides that, they are pretty much identical once they are on the boss. Now, next up we have Solid Gold, and you might be wondering how does a passive that's mythical and it has a higher damage multiplier is below those legendary passives. So here's the thing. Solid Gold, 75% damage multiplier. It has some minus, some negative multipliers as well, and that is why it is below the legendary passives. So we have a 25% movement speed slow, so a little bit slower, but not slow enough to bother you or annoy you at any means. And it actually has a minus 20% attack speed modifier as well. And if you actually sit down and DPS test it, Solid Gold, whilst it is 10% or 0.10 stronger than Tank and Giant, if you take into account that attack speed, the reduction that it has, it's actually a little bit worse than Giant and Tank. But its upside obviously is that it has that 0.4 yen multiplier, so it still remains a very good passive, and it's something that you should get a team of, for your money units, where you swap out when you're killing bosses and they are very low HP, you want to be swapping to a team of solid gold units to increase your farming potential output. Now, if you pair solid gold with something like a ghostly or a time lord, or maybe even a god, you could potentially keep solid gold because the attack speed damage modifier will not harm you that much, because you have like the attack speed from ghostly or maybe the minus hits from god. But it's, as a passive itself, it's worse than giant and tank for damage output purposes, which is what this video is basically based on. Now, its chance to hatch is 0.27%, and it's on par with most of the mythical passives. And lastly, on the A list, I put Leader 3. Now, Leader 3 is kind of a weird passive. It's a great passive, but it's a passive that you want to get on not your like top 2, 3, 4 units. You want to get on something of a weaker unit, and especially if you like have like 3 units with very high level cap, your team is probably going to be better by using Leader 3s and those units that are maxed out, instead of just using like 3 very strong units and 4 like very low level units, because levels have the biggest scaling and the biggest impact on your damage output. But I put it in the A tier here because I would personally take a Leader 3 over the rest of the passives that are in the game. Even though it doesn't like give damage to that unit in particular, it gives 0.25 damage multiplier to your total damage multiplier, so it affects your entire team. And it has the same multiplier chance like solid gold and ghostly at 0.27%. Now, moving on to the B tier, this is some passives that are strictly, and I repeat strictly, they are worth keeping until you have a whole bunch of rerolls to do. So if you find yourself in a situation when you roll either strong 3, tiny, or sorcerer 3, and you have like 5 or 10 rolls left, you should keep them until you stack up those reroll tokens or those shards. If you have a lot of rolls left, you do not keep them, you reroll them. Now, strong 3 gives a 50% damage multiplier, and next up we have tiny that gives 20% damage multiplier and 50% attack speed. Maybe you can make the case that tiny does come out on top of strong 3 in terms of damage, because it's sort of the same argument with ghostly and blessing. Ghostly comes out much better than blessing. So I think especially in a limitless scenario, tiny is better than strong 3. So that's something to keep in mind. It also has a 5 times movement speed for your character, which is pretty cool, I guess. It's not that bad after all. And next up we have Sorcerer 3 now. Sorcerer 3 is a passive that hasn't seen pretty much any use ever since it got introduced. And that's due to the fact that it's just really bad. Now, Sorcerer 3 is one of the passives that I want to see reworked, and I made exactly an entire video on how I want to see Sorcerer being reworked, and that is basically to just increase its ultimate damage multiplier. I think that would be something really interesting, and with the right tuning, it might become even one of the strongest passives in the game. But anyway, its current iteration gives you 20% damage increase, and that is only on Sorcerer 3, guys. So if you have Sorcerer 2 or Sorcerer 1, there is no damage multiplier increase, so just scrap it and forget it. And it gives you -4 attacks for your ultimate, which is honestly, it doesn't really do much. It might sound cool, but it doesn't do much, and it doesn't translate so much on the damage. And you see here, it's actually a very rare passive as well. It's at 0.67% chance to be hatched. And the fun thing is that when this passive was first originally introduced in the game, this used to be a mythical passive. So it was a mythical. I guess the Arab thought of it different, then he saw that it didn't translate that well on paper, and he just completely scrapped the idea. And lastly, on this very B tier list, we have Draconic. Now, Draconic, with the first look, as you see here, 1.5 damage. It looks as if it's exactly like strong 3. It also has this 0.4 drops and that 0.2 yen multiplier, but unfortunately it also has that slow on its attack speed, just like solid gold does. So initially it ends up coming worse, a lot worse than the other passives in this list for pure damage purposes. That's why I have labeled it last in the B tier. But just like solid gold, you want to get yourself a team of Draconics to have those increased drop multipliers when you farm your defense modes, when you farm your time trials, when you do your meteor showers, etc. So you should be trying to save your draconic units that you find along the way, because 0.4 per unit is a lot. But anyway, that pretty much wraps up this list of passives. Now, as I said down below where the C tier was supposed to be, every other passive you can just go ahead and reroll. It is not worth keeping. Like, it's not worth keeping at all. And even like the B tier, I said that you just keep those passives until you have a lot of rolls left. If you have plenty of rolls, you can just go ahead and reroll the B tier as well. Well, except the draconic. You want to keep your draconics on, not your main team, obviously. If it's your main team, you're gonna reroll it as well. But if it's not on your main team, you're gonna keep draconic for its utility purposes. But anyway, that should pretty much, guys, wrap up this tier list. We haven't done this in a while, so now people actually know, because a lot of people ask me, what does this passive do? What does that passive do? So now you know. But anyway, guys, as always, if you have enjoyed this video, make sure to click the like and subscribe button down below. And I will see you guys all on the next one. Take care.